Good morning, everyone out there in YouTube land. My name is Jared, and this is my channel, Mazda B3K. In this episode, we're going to do a timing job on my van, my 1997 Ford E-150 Econoline Starcraft converted van with the 5.4 liter V8 2-valve. And we're going to do this not necessarily because the timing needs to be fixed, but try to address oiling issues. Without further ado, let's get started. All right, order of operations is going to be a little bit weird, but there's going to be a little bit of talking here at the beginning before we actually get down into the work, and that's because this is a really big job and involves a lot of parts, and you shouldn't do this unless you feel comfortable that you think you can do it. And I think you can do it. Follow my video. You break the steps down into stuff that's small enough to handle, but just want to lay this out for you. There's going to be some specialty tools you're going to need, and I'm going to explain how this is more of an oiling issue for this van versus a timing issue for this van as we go along. So first, let's talk about what we're also doing while we're doing timing. We're going to be replacing the oil pump. This is what your oil pump looks like. I'm keeping it in the bag just to keep it from getting dirty. This is a milling pump. This is their high volume version of that pump. So what it will do is it's going to produce 8% more flow, more volume getting pumped around, and that turns into a little bit higher oil pressure, because the issue the van is having is that when it's heat soaked, meaning it gets real hot, still fine cooling wise, but just like if you've done a long run on a highway on a hot summer's day, the oil pressure needle begins to dance, and that only occurs when the oil pressure sensor is reading right around 8 psi in oil pressure, which is right at the bare minimum that the engine needs to safely function. So a little bit sketchy. So we're going to do this to generate more flow and hopefully raise that pressure up a little bit. And then some of the timing components also require oil pressure to do what they do. So if they're leaking, that prevents oil from going to other places in the engine, which can cause oiling issues. Let's take a look at our parts. This is what's called a tensioner guide. This, if you put your finger on this plastic here, it's very smooth. And this is what your timing chain rides on, and there's two of these for the left and the right, driver, passenger, however you want to call it. Then these are the arms. The other side of the chain rides along this, though it doesn't directly touch, which is why it doesn't have that nice smooth material on it. Again, there are two of these. One of these has a revision. It's I can't remember which side. I'd have to look at the part number, but it has one of the bolts gets changed out to a long bolt instead of a short bolt, and we'll address that when we get there. I'm not going to rattle off the part numbers. What I'll do is I'll put that in the description for the actual kit. This was an entire kit that I bought. And then your timing chain is in here. There are actually two of them. And milling being milling, the picture is disingenuous. On a Ford system, there's actually a couple of links that are a different color, and they're special because of that. On a milling chain, and they're actually, I can see two of them right here. See how these are shiny? That's how milling shows you that these are those special links, which again, I'll address later, but just letting you know right now, it's a little bit different, it's still visible, and I take a marker and I make it ridiculously visible, so I don't have an issue with that. That's your timing chain. But the one that we really need to talk about a little bit is this guy. This is one of your tensioners. Now, these are the older cast iron ratcheting tensioners. Okay, you'll see it's got this pin in it. Don't pull that pin. This pin is keeping the ratcheting arm from going and shooting out. Because how this thing works is when it's mounted in, there is a spring and a ratcheting mechanism, and when that pin is taken out, the spring pushes this piston up into one of your guide arms, and then that pulls tension on the chain to keep it tight. Now, that being said, it's not fully done with just a spring and a ratchet. That's why you have this. You'll notice there's a passage in here. This is for oil. And you'll also notice there's no gasket. That's by design. This is a very smooth machined metal surface, and it's supposed to be smooth enough and machined enough that this surface itself is the seal, and that keeps the oil from escaping. Now, my theory is on my van, because when I got it, there was a massive amount of coolant that was mixing in with the oil due to a lower intake gasket failure. I fixed that and I cleaned out the oil and everything, but my theory is that this surface got worn enough that oil is now escaping, and that is causing oiling issues. So even though I believe the tensioners mechanically are fine, I don't think there's anything wrong with the ratchet or anything. I don't think that my chain is loose and causing issues in that regard. I want to replace these because this is one of the few places where you can have oil leaking out internally and it cause pressure problems. Because basically you have, so you can see a little ratcheting gear in there. You can have these leaking. You can have your crank bearings just too worn out, so you can't make pressure at the crank anymore, which is where you get your oil pressure. You can also have a clogged up pickup tube, and as you'll see in the picture I'm going to put here on the screen in a second, I actually got an inspection cam up in there, and pickup tube's clean. Which brings us to this. So that's our parts for the actual timing job, but there's also gaskets you're going to have to replace along the way. This is for your timing cover. It's kind of weird because it has two kind of string gaskets you have to put in, and then this is your front oil seal. You got to replace that as well, and I'll go over how to do all of that. You're also going to need, these are valve cover gaskets. If you're doing this job and you don't have a ton of miles on your vehicle, you might be able to just replace these, reuse them and not replace. But I just replace because I don't want to fool with problems. And let's be serious here. If you're watching this video, you've got an engine that hasn't been made for 20 years now. So I'm imagining your engine's got miles on it. All right, that's the blabbing about the parts. Let's blab a bit about specialty tools you're going to need. All right, blabbing about specialty tools. This is a cam holder. Okay, it's going to lock onto your camshaft under the valve cover, and you pull it tight so it cannot rotate. This is extremely important for when you start doing the timing job. You take the chains off, and at that point the cam and the crank are no longer tied together. If your cam starts rotating wildly, you'll get way out of time, and you'll make the job a whole lot harder than it needs to be. Try to buy the good ones. These are not the good ones. These are kind of Chinesium, which is why I have a ton of washers in here. I had to put these in here in order to get things to lock up correctly. The metal does bow a little bit, but it will get the job done after you modify it. Another tool you're going to need, or you don't necessarily need this tool, but it's very useful. This is a cam positioning tool. There's a little dowel that, again, you'll see once the timing cover's off. And you put this on here, and it forces your cam to be in just the right position to go ahead and do timing operations. So when this slides on and it fits comfortably and you can take it on and off by hand, you know you're in the right position. This has a slot for the Woodruff key that's on the crankshaft. Again, that's how it locks it in place. You don't necessarily need this. There are ways to get around it, but this just makes the job easier. Just like you don't necessarily need this, you can use a vice grip if you're pretty good with a vice grip. But again, this makes the job easier. Those are your main specialty tools. We may wind up needing some specialty tools as we try to access things on the engine. I actually think that's going to go a little easier than when I did this job on my truck, because on my truck I wound up having to get a flexing ratchet in order to get out some of the valve cover bolts in the back because they were just insane. But in a van, we have a doghouse, and we just take that doghouse off and we should have easy access to both the front and the back of the valve cover. But the flip side is that we got less room to play around with in a van, so everything's going to be in our way. And we may have to take more stuff off to do what we got to do. All right, that's officially all the blah, blah, blah. If you're still with me, congratulations. Thank you for sitting tight. I try to explain all this at the beginning because we got a lot of parts. We got some specialty parts that we need. And I want you to be able to go get all this stuff before you're halfway into the job and then realizing you need stuff, because been there, done that. We got this covered now. Now we're actually going to go get some work done. All right, first things first, as always, we need to remove our air intake. It's going to be an 8mm. There's going to be 4 of them. Just like that. And guys, come up with some kind of system to keep up with where your bolts are going. We're going to wind up having a lot of bolts kind of everywhere. So if you want to stick your bolts back in the holes after you get the part out, you can do that. If you want to do bags, you can do bags. Just however you need to do it in order to make sure you don't lose stuff. God, gotta do this. There we go. But you don't want to be that guy who gets into the project, you actually get the work done, and then it's a nightmare to put it all back together because you forgot to grab stuff. Also, don't forget, disconnect your MAF IAT right there. Okay. Oh, there was actually some junk that the filter was catching. How about that? Okay. Oh, hang on. Naughty trimmer. Don't fall over like that. Okay, that is step 1. Step 2 is that we'll go ahead and remove the battery because we're going to be working all over the engine. We're going to have electrical connections all over the place. And you don't want to accidentally arc weld. I did that once. Not very good. It cost me a condenser. So, battery next. I have a custom battery setup, so can't really help you with the terminals, but good reminder, you're going to need an 8mm back here for the battery hold down clamp if you still have the original. All right, doghouse has got to come out next. I know it looks like it won't come out. It will. Mine's going to come out in 2 pieces. There's the cubby, right? This guy. And it actually is designed to come off. It sits on 3 big pegs, and there's a metal pull tab at the bottom that you have to grab. And if you do that, it'll slide right up and out. My pull tab's kind of busted, so it just comes right up and out. And then on top of that, if you get that out of the way, there's going to be 2 latches on either side. There's a latch up here. There's a latch there. You pull it out and twist. And then there's one on the other side, on the passenger side, same deal. And once you do that, you can start to kind of wiggle the doghouse out. If you can't take this cubby off for whatever reason, make sure you don't have the TV because you're just in for a bad day. but you can pull this out, turn it sideways, and then kind of sneak it between the two front seats and get it out into the middle area where you have more room. But again, this one will come off, and then I can pull the whole thing out. So I'm going to do that. Not going to film it. I'm just going to get it done. And then we'll have access to the rear of the engine. For the curious, this is what I meant. 1, 2, 3, and then this guy. And like I said, what happens a bunch is if you try to buy a new cubby at the junkyard, they don't know about this, and that bottom tongue piece breaks. But what you're supposed to do is get your hands way down here, pull up on that, it will release, and then you get this up. But now that everything is unlatched, if you kind of reach in the back, as you can see, it's loose. It's kind of a pain to wiggle out, particularly in my case. I've got a bunch of cables and stuff up here. But wiggle out it will, and then we have access. One thing I did forget to mention, for the doghouse to come out, these beauty covers need to come off. They just pull off. Do try to be careful as you pull them, because as you can see, they have these metal clips that are mounted on plastic, and over time they start to wiggle, and then they come off, and then your stuff doesn't grab on anymore. And I have yet to figure out a good way to get these things to stay on once they get loose. So if anyone has an idea, put it in the comments. So there we are. Got this out. Taking advantage of our big double doors here. Here we are. Access to the back of the engine. So this is going to be pretty useful as far as trying to sneak tools in, but from what I can see, we're still going to have some battles, because I am not sure how we're going to get to the middle bottom valve cover bolt, and we absolutely have to take the valve covers off to do what we need to do today. If you're doing a timing job, if you're not doing a full timing job and you're very careful, you could get the chains off, but you got to come up with some way to keep the cam from moving. That's kind of why you got to take the valve covers off, because as soon as you take the chains loose, the cams are going to try to move. But if you can lock the cams in position somehow, maybe by gripping on the bottom of the cam gear and locking that against something, because that becomes visible once you take the timing cover off. Maybe. Oh man. Over there we have more room, but this side, oof, yuck. I'm gonna have to get my flashlight out and take a good look. I want to get an idea of what I need to do there before I go any further. All right guys, do you see that clamp right there? It's got the little the bolt head. We need to remove that. It's going to be an 8mm, and that lets us remove the rest of the air intake, which we will need to get out of the way. And something that just occurred to me is that this son of a gun has an EGR valve, which means that, yep, there it is. Oh, that's going to be amazing. See that really rusty bolt right there? That's the EGR valve, and to do what we got to do, it's either got to come off at that end or it's got to come off at the other end. And I forgot about that, because on my truck it does not have an EGR valve because it's considered a heavy truck. This one does have one. Hooray! So we're gonna figure that out, but not right this second. We're gonna take our air intake off. All right, here's what we look like with it out. To take it out, you will also need to remove your fresh air for the PCV system. That's what this is. You're also going to need to remove the fresh air, or just the air metering for your IAC, idle air control valve, this guy. And you're going to need to take this guy loose. I don't remember what sensor that is offhand, but he's there. He has to come off. Okay. So now that is out of the way. We've got a little more real estate. You may wind up taking a zip tie or something to kind of get these out of the way as we work. All right. Oh yeah, that's great. So we're gonna have to disconnect this guy. Actually, no, we'll see if we can't just take him off and get him out of the way. But yeah. All right, so decision time for you, the consumer watching this video. This really needs to come out of the way. This is your upper radiator hose. However, if you're full of coolant, it's gonna make a big old mess when you try to take this out. So you can leave it here, and that's really aggravating because it's really tough to get the fan shroud out. If you don't take this off, well, you partially drain your coolant so that you can take this end off, keep doing what you're doing, or you can go ahead and decide, you know, this is a good time to do a drain and fill on my coolant. You can do that too. That's what I'm doing, because I'm still trying to get oil out of the cooling system from when the oil cooler failed and pumped like a quart or two in there. It was great. So that's going to come off, which means I'm going to go below and take care of coolant. If somebody wants to know how to do that, let me know in the comments. I'm not going to film it. I'm trying to make this go faster than the last time I did this. It took me like 2 weeks doing it the first time in my truck, and I don't have that time. So I'm going to knock out the coolant. While I'm down there, I'm going to go ahead and also drain the oil, because we do need it out. Otherwise, it's going to make a god-awful mess. And honestly, we want to take it out because once the front timing cover comes off, which you can't really see because all the belts and pulleys and everything are there, but once that comes off, we have access into the oil pan. Okay? And if it's full of oil, it's going to make changing out the oil pump a pain in the butt, and your oil is going to get contaminated. It's better to drain it. So I'm going to do those things. I'm going to assume you already know how to do those things. If not, I think it's a 16 millimeter on the oil pan drain plug, and there's going to be a petcock located kind of up over here on the radiator, and we're going to open that petcock and just let things drain out. It's going to drain out about 4 gallons of coolant total. So make sure you've got containers for that if you want to reuse it, or if you're going to recycle it, whatever you're going to do. But I will bring you back after I get those things done, and we're working on this upper hose. So for reference, petcock is there. That's on the driver's side of the vehicle, bottom of the radiator. What else we need to do down here while we are down here is this shield right here needs to come off, and we need to take this clamp loose. This clamp's attached to our fan shroud, so if we do not take it loose, fan shroud will not come out. So just pop it, you know, not much holding it. And then there are 3 points where the shroud is held. There's one up here on the passenger frame rail. So take your trim tool. That's what this is. Sometimes it's called a cat claw. That's one. Your second contact point is actually the shroud itself, right there. just kind of get that down. And then our third contact point is right here in this cradle piece. It's right there. That comes out. Normally you have to take that off because it gives you a ton of access to the air conditioner when you need to work the air conditioner. But I figured it would help give us access to these four oil pan bolts that we need to take off for the front cover when we get to that, and just general better access. Also, like I said, we had a contact point in a shroud, so we wanted our shroud to come off. That had to come off. All right, that's it for that. Letting the oil finishing dribbling out here, and then I'll get that squared away, plugged again, and we will go back topside. All right, now that we've handled everything on the bottom that we need to work on right now, we're going to work on getting our radiator hose loose. And there is a specialty tool you can buy for this, or you can use some pliers in most cases. If it's particularly stubborn, you know, get your locking pliers out, do that. I'm going to go ahead and take it loose at both ends. Other end is right there. Same deal. Yeah, slide this off. And you may, yeah, I'm gonna have to get the locking pliers on that because I don't have enough strength. But get that out of the way. It's not gonna be the first hose you're gonna need to move. This hose is basically brand new, so I replaced it. So I'm not worried about that. Oh, that is one thing. If you're doing this and you legitimately have an old rig and an old hose, be mindful that when the hoses get older, they kind of get thin and soft. And there is a non-zero chance that you take it off and you go to put it back on, and no matter what you do, the spring clamp won't seal it back up and it's going to leak, and you may need to change it out for a worm clamp where you can put more pressure on it, or think about replacing the hose. Just something to keep in mind. Even if you've kept up with the cooling system and it's not gross in the hose, they just wear out over time from heat. Okay, next step, belt comes off. To do that, we need to get a 1/2 drive inside of that silver housing you see in the center of the frame. That's the tensioner arm. We're going to get that in there. We're going to turn it to the right, and I'll give you an example of what that looks like right now. So I'm using a big breaker bar with a pivoting head. You want to try to wiggle that in a wee more if you can, but this will be pulled to the right. And what that'll do is release tension on the belt, and then you just slip the belt off the alternator pulley, and then you'll be able to pull the belt out without too much issue. Okay, belt is off. It'll come off the driver's side pretty easy. Passenger side's a little bit more tricky. You kind of need to honestly pull it out from the bottom. That'll make things easier. All right, here we are down below again. So kind of grab around the power steering, and we're gonna give her a pull. Oh, forgot, we gotta give her some slack, get it off the crank first, and then give it a pull. Make sure we don't hook on the AC, and out she comes. If you've never done it, now is an excellent time to inspect your belt. This one is brand new, so this is an excellent example of what a brand new belt should look like. No glazing, no cracks, no chewed off ribs. If you see vertical cracks going up and down when you're looking like the belt like this, I think it's if you see more than 3 vertical cracks per inch, it's time to put in a new belt. So keep that in mind. Almost forgot, one more set of specialty tools that you're going to need. You're going to need a 36 millimeter wrench or equivalent. I strongly suggest that you get the actual 36 millimeter wrench. And you're going to need this tool. This is a fan removal tool. And I'll show you how it goes in a second. But you need this and you need this because you're going to push one against the other to break your fan loose. But you do need this tool or something like it. And you do need this tool or something like it. Otherwise, you're not going to get the fan off without a major struggle. Okay, here's the setup for how to use your fan tool. You're going to put a 1/4 or 1/2 drive through it. And use that same breaker bar I used for the belt. And you're going to hook it over the 4 bolts that actually hold the fan to the fan pulley. Okay, or the water pump pulley is actually what it is. And then you're going to take your 36 millimeter. It's going to go on the big nut that's sitting right there. Now, this nut is a regular threading, which means that righty-tighty, lefty-loosey does apply. You need to take this giant wrench and pull it to the left, and then you need to take your removal tool and pull it to the right. So you pull these towards each other to get it to pop loose. Like I said, regular thread, so we're going to turn to the left for removal. There are other vehicles and configurations where it is a reverse thread, and you'd have to turn it to the right. This is not the case. Regular thread, turn to the left. Be advised, this part's a little fiddly. It likes to slip off the bolts. You just got to keep fighting with it till you get it. And it will pop off unless it's super rusty. If it's super rusty, you're probably going to need to throw heat on it, throw some penetrating lube at it before you try this. All right, once you spin this off, don't do like me and let it crash against your radiator. You can puncture a radiator doing that, so be careful. To get it out, what we need to do is take the shroud off. That's an 8 millimeter there, 8 millimeter there. Just take them out, and then the shroud should lift straight up. And once you get it high enough, as you can see, get it up a little bit. Get your fan out, like so. Go stick it in a safe place. And then the shroud, you may have to fight a little bit because of stuff like this. In fact, I'm gonna take that off right quick. Forgot about that. You got this overflow tube to the degas bottle. Let's come off. And now it's decided to get persnickety. There it goes. Now that that's out of the way, and then my vacuum booster line out of the way. Out it comes. And once you have this out of the way, it opens up a lot more room to continue stripping down the front of the engine, which is what we need to do to prepare for getting the front timing case off. All right, gonna go through this kind of quick. Spooky, right? This idler comes off. Tensioner off. This idler off. AC compressor, you don't have to touch. Crank, we're not touching it, but eventually it comes off. Power steering pump, pulley, your call, but it's easier, I find, to just take it off. There's 3 10 millimeter bolts that hold it in position, and you can take it off, swing it out of the way, and that'll be that. And if things get intense, well, then I'm just going to catch the fluid and I'll refill it. That's what I did on my truck. So get all that done. This is a 15, I'm pretty sure. These 3 are 10s. And also water pump pulley comes off. This is a 10, I believe. So do all that. Keep in mind that if you've not taken your pulleys off in a long time, they may be a little sticky. You can put some lube on them, tap them with a mallet so you don't deface and damage them, and go ahead and get them off. And this is also a good time to spin your pulleys and see if they sound funny. If you have a crunchy, grovelly noise, might be time to replace them. Now in my case, the idlers are brand new, the tensioner is brand new from misadventures that I have filmed and are on the channel. But this sounds fine. So go ahead and knock that out. Okay, if you're following along, this is what you should look like at this point. Crank's still there, AC still there, power steering still there. I have pulled this radiator hose to get access to the power steering bolts, power steering pump bolts that hold this in. You can see one of them right there, okay? And there should be a second one right there. And then there should be a third one that is below. See the one right next to the pulley? There should be one on the other side of it going down. So you'll need to access that one from the bottom. But these two we might get from the top. And if we're lucky, we can get them out without needing to pull our reservoir line, which is right here. So we have to pull that. You know, we're going to pee ATF everywhere. It's going to look like a crime scene. And then we'll have to top that off. But if you need to do a drain and fill of your power steering fluid, not a bad time to do so. It's all up to you on what you want to do. But we're going to do that. And alternatively, if you so desire, you don't have to pull the pump. You can just take this pulley off. But it's a power steering pulley, which means you need the special removal tool to pull it. I don't have it because I just pull the pump. You can rent this tool from most of any of your local part shops. They should offer that service and you can rent it. It is designed, I mean, yeah, you can take the whole thing out and remove it that way, but the way the tool is set up is so that you can remove the remove the pulley without needing to remove the pump. Okay, spiel over. I'm going to get in there. Those are 10mm bolts. So I'm going to see what I can do to get those guys out. And next stop is pulling the pump. All right, see this little dude right here? That is your third and final power steering bolt. You can only get at it from the underside. I'm going to try to use my flex ratchet on a long 10mm. But that's our third one. We need to get that out of the way. Once we do, we're good to go. And if you haven't seen the video where I replaced this guy, this is your oil pressure switch. Take a note of that and file it away. This guy may become important later when we go to prime the pump. Hopefully not, but it might be a thing. So let's get this out and then we can slide our pump out of the way. Wherever the pump winds up going, it's got to be clear of the front timing cover so that we can pull that out nice and clean. That is critical, that there is nothing in the way of the front timing cover so that when we pull it out and put it back in, we can just drop it right in, because we're going to have to put down some gasket maker in a couple of places. So you don't want to be wiggling around this and jiggling around that and whatever when it's time to do that. And there we go. And that's what I mean by get it out of the way. Just Get it clear of the cover. Now you should be starting to see the shape. It's like a big V of the front cover. We're getting there. So the next thing we'll go after is the crank pulley. That requires a puller tool. It's not really a specialized tool, it's a general puller, but it can work for cranks. So we're gonna take care of that. I'll show you how to set all that up. Honestly, I'm procrastinating because the hardest part of this job is none of this. This is the easy stuff. It's the valve covers. They're kind of terrible, and I really don't want to go fight with EGR, but that's happening too. And because we're in a van and everything's all jammed up, we're probably going to have to pull some stuff up there that's currently attached to the upper intake, which is that big spider looking thing. So yeah, it's gonna be a pain because it's a van, but a whopping 5 people said, you know what, we want to see this. No, it was 4 people. One person said, no, I don't want to. All right. Let's get this guy. I think that's a 24 millimeter bolt that needs to come out. And then after that, we insert the puller. So I was totally off on that. This is an 18. And my recommendation to you is get an impact to get this thing loose, because when you turn this, the engine's going to try to turn, right? Because it's the crank. But impact has enough torque that it will break the bolt loose, which is what you need. It's a big one. Now we're ready for the puller, and someone about this point is probably going, well, you're not showing any of your work really. Well, the reason why is I'm kind of in a hurry. Not a hurry like I'm cutting corners, but whenever the camera comes out, if you've never done any filming, any YouTubing, anything, the time doubles at a minimum, because you're thinking about setting up the shot, getting the angle right, figuring out how to do the work where you're not blocking the shot, and then the blabbing that goes with it slows everything way down. So I'm showing you what you need to do. I'm giving you the tools and the measurements. And on the tricky bits, you know, I will film everything so you can see the tricky bits. But none of this has been particularly tricky. Alrighty. So just throwing this out here because I don't want to see it in the comments where people go, you didn't show the work. No, I didn't. For the probably 15 people who will watch this, because this is a pretty specialized video. I doubt there's a lot of people that are willing to go after the timing chains in their Econoline van. All right, let me explain how a pulley puller works. So we have our generic puller, and it has these slots to give you, so it can fit on different kinds of pulleys, okay? Ideally, you get it to line up on 3 of these slots if your pulley allows it. Some pulleys will only have 2 slots. And how this works is, you can see I put a little nose on it, okay? This nose is going to push into the hole where we took the crank bolt from. So this is going to sit like this, and I'm going to spin it to line up these 3 with some holes that are on the crank pulley / harmonic balancer. Okay, and then we're going to take a bolt, which I've already tested that it should fit. You put it through, okay? And you're going to put this through all 3 holes, right? Like this. You're going to make sure you have a washer on each one to help distribute load. You're going to put it in like this, okay? And you're going to tighten up. And you'll see this when we actually go to do it, but you're going to tighten these up as much as you can before you start turning your big central bolt. And then what happens is this, with these firmly screwed in or bolted in, whatever term you want to use, to your pulley, when you start pushing this, it's actually going to start pressing the pulley off the crank snout, the actual crankshaft. Okay, now when you do this, you don't go super crazy fast because there's a ton of force involved here. What you're going to do is normally you can take anti-seize, put a little engine oil, penetrating lube even works in a pinch, but you're going to soak this down and you're going to go slow, because you try to go fast, you put too much force on these fine threads and you'll tear them. And once the thread is stripped, well, your puller is not working anymore. And you know, you kind of need this thing. So that's the principle. And what'll happen is the pulley will just pop right off, and then you'll take this out of it because it's done its job. But that's how it works. I don't know what size and threading these are offhand. This is from a pretty generic Harbor Freight puller set. Pittsburgh, super cheap. It's like 15 bucks. It comes with a variety of bolts in it of different lengths and thread types to allow you to do work on a bunch of different kinds of vehicles. You're going to have to grab the ones that work for you, and then we'll get to it. All right, again, blabbing done. I'm going to get this thing in, let you see what it looks like once it's in, and then I'm popping this off because it's lunchtime and I'm hungry. So, pro tip, before you do all this, don't do what I just did and bend your pulley, because I forgot to remove the crank washer. So when you go to pull the crank bolt out, there's a giant washer that needs to come with it, and it may not want to come out because in order to prevent oil leaks, it gets a blob of RTV where the woodruff key is, and that was holding it in position. And if you don't do this, what winds up happening is the nose of your puller pushes against the crank washer. The crank washer pushes against the crank pulley, so it can't move. You're trying to put force on it, but you're pushing against the pulley. So the thing that winds up giving is your puller. So I think I actually managed to bend it, but it should still work for what we need to do. Just don't be like me. Learn from the mistake. So I'm going to go ahead and keep working on this. I know it's working now because even without my big breaker bar, I can do this. I can crank on it by hand with just a 1/2 drive. And I can see it moving. So this will do you if you take the crank washer off. Oh yeah. This is much easier to move than what I was doing before. So you can, I don't know if you can see it on camera, but I can see the pulley moving now. So there it is. And there it goes. Okay. So again, this is a fairly trivial thing as long as you do what you need to do. And also, see that right there? I got lucky. That's why you don't push the pulley off with your support bolts, because this is an aluminum cover. And if you push too hard, you will blow a hole through it you'll be in trouble. Now in my case, I didn't push too hard, fortunately. Probably for an abundance of caution, I'll fill those in with some gasket maker when the time comes, but new timing case ain't cheap. Timing cover. Yeah, off it came. That looks good. And at this point, we have cleared everything out of the way of the front timing cover. We still have a connector here, you know, we still got to take all the bolts out. But our challenge now is the valve covers, because we need access to the camshafts. The only way we get access to the camshafts is by removing the valve covers. The actual operation probably won't be bad. The challenge is moving everything else out of the way so you can actually get to the bolts and have enough room to lift the cover up and out and move it out of the way. That's where we are now. Lunchtime. All right, we're gonna start clearing the area around this valve cover so that we can actually work on it. So first thing we're gonna do is get this big block of electrical out of the way. That's gonna be a 10 millimeter. You unscrew it, it backs it apart so you can pull it apart. These two should be a pair of just push down on the retainer and pull. Then we're gonna need to take this, I think it's a 15 millimeter off, get this ground strap out of the way, and then pull this bracket out of the way so we can pull it. What's gonna wind up happening is all of our cabling, everything, we're gonna pull towards the middle where my fingers are. And we're gonna have to do all that just to get things clear. One challenge we're gonna have is the transmission dipstick tube is gonna be there and we can't do much about it. So we'll have to work around that. But otherwise, that's where we're gonna get started. So this is what that looks like. Once you get this all off, I pulled this vacuum line off. It normally sits up in here. Next step is we're taking our oil fill neck off. There's a 8 millimeter right here. And then you're gonna have to get in there with some pliers, loosen that up. This comes off, I've had it off before. Now the fun of all this is gonna be that this big electrical leg runs along the top of the, there it is, wiggle it a little bit. It runs along the top of the valve cover. We're gonna have to cut it free of its cable guides, and we're gonna have to pull this sucker back where it's gonna coil up against the top and the back. Ultimately is what's gonna happen here. But we will have to cut it free, and if you want to put it back, cool. I'm probably not. It's just gonna lay there and that'll be good. Anyway, this comes out, and then I got to take this contraption out. This is something I added to help the air conditioner blow colder. I made a video about it. You can look under the van's playlist and find it if you want, but I'll need to swing this out of the way to, again, free up more space around this valve cover. So we'll do all that, and then we're gonna see where we are after doing all that. Because one thing that just occurred to me is that this bracket is gonna catch on everything under creation when I'm trying to swing that back. But all right, still working on getting the oil fill tube off, but along the way we're having to pull this wire harness leg, and it reaches down and around. Let's see if I can get you a better view, but it goes into the crank position sensor, which we're going to want to leave off for the duration here. Can't get you a better view. I know I haven't gotten you a good view yet because there's so much junk in the way. And you'd almost think a complicated machine like a car wouldn't have so much junk, right? are you? There you are. There it is, right up there. Anyway, there's a connection. It's basically by the AC compressor. You got to take it loose. You just push the tab in, pull it out. The other thing that you're going to need to grab, and we'll go top side for this. Let you guys get drunk. I'm seasick. You have the connection for the AC clutch right here. That has to come out. And once you get all that out, you'll notice this whole harness leg comes up. So that is your crank position sensor right there. It's at the end of the run. And then right here is your clutch connection. It's got that one dog leg that you pull up. That'll get it loose. And this runs right down in there, right there next to the fill tube. So we can now start pulling that backwards and out of the way, looping it over towards the center. Yeah, the problem I'm facing is it's a two-part spring clamp right there, so I can get one side of it but not both sides of it, and I need to wiggle it up a little bit. And now I can't get in there. There's too much crap in the way, so getting that crap out of the way so I can pull the piece. All right, so a couple of things. In order to get this big harness leg to scooch over, we need to disconnect the electrical for the coils and for the fuel injectors down the top of the passenger valve cover. And then this support bracket right here, I know you can't see it very well, but there's a bolt right there. It's a support bracket for the transmission dipstick. We're going to need to take that bolt out because what I'm going to try to do is sneak that harness leg under it. So it'll get pinned in up here, and that'll give us some working room to get this valve cover off. We're also going to need to take this evap box off. There's no way around it, because otherwise we are not going to have the necessary clearance to get this off and clear of the camshaft sprocket. Just not gonna happen. So it'd be grand. Also, don't forget, it's easier to access from the inside, but buried back there is your PCV valve. You need to either take the valve out or at least take the connection to the valve out so that, again, the valve cover can get free. I would recommend taking the valve out because you're going to need every inch of clearance you can get. Try to get this thing off because it's in there tight. I think we've got enough clearance that we're not going to have to somehow or another hammer the metal in and clearance it ourselves, but it's going to be tight. Because probably, this is just me musing, but when they put this engine in, it was probably fully dressed or close to it, kind of like this. And then they just plopped it in because the front clip was not on at the time. All of this right here would have been off. So you just have a giant hole right here in the middle, and you just stick it in and plop it down. And that is probably how they did it. We don't have that luxury, so we'll see how she goes. Anyway, I'm going to keep working on getting this big cable line out of the way, and I'll bring you back when I have it done. So the good news is I figured out how to remove the dipstick tube for the transmission, which is going to be huge for clearing out all the stuff above that valve cover. Bad news is I broke the dipstick along the way. See that? It was much worse. I put it in my vise to try to straighten it out, and that's as straight as I can get it. I might be able to throw some heat on it, but honestly, I can just buy a new one. They're out there still. But again, learn from my mistakes here. If you're gonna pull the dipstick tube, get the dipstick out first. It'll make life so much better for you. Anywho's, let me show you what's going on. It's kind of a mess. This is the main vacuum in. Goes up into the plenum. Had to pull that out, and then I had to pull the vacuum from everything else, which means from the purge, from the, that's not EGR, I'm not 100%, that might be purge, I'm not sure. One of these is the purge, evap purge solenoid, the other one is something, and then this flying saucer guy, that is your EGR. He gets a vacuum too. There's a vacuum there, there's a vacuum here, there's a vacuum here, and then you have a vacuum on the fuel pressure regulator over there. All that comes off. That you come out here. I had to remove both of the cooler lines, both here, and then there's another one buried down here. I had to pull them both, try to make room, and I'm gonna have to take some more stuff apart. But what I found out is after you remove a 10mm nut here and that 10mm bolt up there, this will just pull out like that. No seal or anything, I don't think. So once I disconnect this, again, I'm pretty sure this is fuel vapor stuff. Once I get that out of its little metal holder there, and I kind of yoink this whole thing back, we can get all the tubing and all the garbage out from up there, and we should have a nice clear path above this valve cover. So this is what you get after you can get the dipstick tube out of the way. You have a cleared valve cover. So now we're at the point where we could start trying to pull it. Though I would prefer to start working the driver's side and see what we need to do there. I really, really, really hope that we don't have to pull the evap box. I'm probably going to try to take this off without pulling the evap box. So that's just yet another set of things I have to touch that I've never touched before. And I just don't really feel like doing that. So let's mosey on over to the driver's side and see what we can see over there. So just kind of give you a feel here. This carpet's pretty much shot, so I don't much, not too worried about getting grunge on it. But this is that long whip that services the AC clutch crank position sensor. This is where those big connectors go. Here's all your coil and fuel injector. And then you just got all this coolant piping in the way, and you've got your evap stuff that's all there, so you just get that all out of there. Funnily enough, there's your Schrader. Do fuel line checking, buried under all that junk. Impressive. All right, to the driver's side. All right, taking a look over here, I can see at a basic level we got the same sort of thing going on. We want to disconnect all the coils, all the electrical for the fuel injection. We want to see if we can then pull that straight back and get it out of the way. We've got, I think this is vacuum right here. We can pull that and get it out of the way. The problem is, oh wait, this looks like it's, yeah. using my fingers here, it feels like it's part of the EGR system. So we're gonna need to disconnect those lines anyway, and we need to take loose the EGR, otherwise there's no way we're getting this off. But all that electrical has to come loose. I think we might be able to get away with not actually disconnecting the fuel rails there in the back. I'll have to take a look back there. But if we get the EGR out of the way and we get the electrical harness pulled back and out of the way, which means we'll have to disconnect things like the TPS and whatever this is. It looks like a map sensor. I'm not 100% on what this is. But get that electrical off, I think we'll have it. But the real challenge is this big boy and trying to get a position where we can get a wrench and give her the old heave-ho. I'm actually going to do a little bit of research on that before I do it. I want to make sure I do it right the first time, because with rusty stuff, you don't often get a second chance at it without pain and woe and misery. So I want to do it right first time. I'll go do a little bit of homework on that one. But let's go take a look. Driver's side from the back, see what we have. All right, here's what we have. So our fuel injection sits right here. It's gonna be super obnoxious to get it. Now, it's not really wanting to budge, so we won't need to take the front part of the rail off. We are going to need to take the actual lines coming up from the tank off. The return and the inflow to the injectors. So that will need to come off, but I think that's it. We'll need to take that fresh air tubing out of the way. Yeah, that should do it. It's not going to be nearly as redonkulous as the passenger side. The big thing here, and I just said it, it's the EGR. It is figuring out how to remove that correctly and successfully, and we'll be good. Because here's this end, right? This end's pretty straightforward. Just get a wrench on it, crank up, right? That's not a big deal. It's the other end that I'm concerned with. All right, back. I know it's getting dark, a little harder to see. Did my research, came back with how we need to do this. This is a 32 millimeter nut. I don't know what it is on the other side, but on this side it's a 32 millimeter. And I'm gonna go with that longer wrench so that I have more leverage. And I'm gonna make super sure that I turn it the right way. Should be pulling it upwards in this case. We'll get this side loose, and then we'll get down below and see what's going to be involved to get that out. Good morning, everyone. It's been about 2 weeks since I turned the camera on. A couple of things have changed. If any guys look at my community post, I was able to successfully, you see that hole there, get the EGR tube out on this side. That was not very fun. It involved a lot of coil, and then I went after it with my propane torch. And at the end of the day, it took buying this tool, this big air hammer, and I was able to get it off, but it was a fairly destructive process. Yeah, here it is. So while I did successfully get it off, I mangled this nut really badly. So I had already bought a new tube, and I'm just going to go ahead and install the new one when we get around to it. I just about destroyed the adapter sitting in the manifold. That's that hole that you saw over here. It'll come into focus. Look down there, see that? See how it's shiny on one side? It's because I knocked the stuffings out of it with the air hammer trying to loosen it. But I believe it'll still thread. You can get a new tube on eBay for about 40 bucks. It's the same. This is a 32 millimeter nut, just like the other one was. I bring that up because I was already thinking ahead about how we're going to tighten this thing up, because we're in real tight quarters, and I'm going to buy a 32 millimeter crow's foot. And hopefully that'll let us tighten this thing up. I'm going to drown it in anti-seize so we don't have issues. Now, since we do finally have that out of the way, probably gonna take this loose so that this is the throttle cable for the pedal and for the cruise, so we can just kind of get that out of the way. And also we need to go ahead and take loose all the electrical through here for both the coils and the fuel injectors, like we did on the other side. And we're gonna lift, hopefully it'll be just like the other side and this will just pop right off, but we're gonna lift this plastic rail out of the way. And then in the back, I think we need to disconnect at least one fuel line. And since we're gonna be trying to get this entire harness leg out, we need to disconnect into the EGR pressure sensor, which is what this thing is. The TPS, which is right here. I don't remember what this is for specifically, but it needs to be disconnected. We already took off our cam position sensor right here. And there's something else buried under the alternator that's got to come off. I'm not sure what that is, but it's got to come off. And also this comes over to here. This is where ECT is. That has to come off. And it looks like the alternator leg is fed off something else, so we don't need to mess with the alternator. But we need to get all of that out of the way, front and back. And then we're going to pull it back just like we did over here. And after that, we can finally make an attempt at removing the valve covers. And if we get the valve covers off, we can go ahead and take the timing cover off. Then we can actually do what we came here to do. All right, there we have it. So now we have all sorts of room. Like I said, I'll probably still take this off so these can just go up and out of the way. But otherwise, we've got plenty of room. The only thing really I have a concern about right now is the oil dipstick. There's a bolt that holds it on to the head. And if I need to do that, that'll give me a little bit of wiggle room, but you got to be careful, because when you're bending it, you're bending it. It's, yeah. So we'll see. I am thinking it's probably going to need to come loose a little bit, but we'll see. I'm not so worried about the valve cover bolts this go round. They seem to be in much better shape than the trucks. Something about, I don't know exactly what it is about the van's design, that I've noticed that even though it is older than my truck, all the bolts and everything are in much better shape, a lot less rusty. It's made life a lot easier. Anyway, I'm stopping at this point. I have about another hour I could work on this, but I don't want to open up all these cases and then it sit open for a week, which is what would happen, because today is Sunday and I do not have time during the week to put appreciable efforts towards this. So one thing to note, the harness whip over here, it does go down and around to your oil pressure sensor, and it's easy to see that from the bottom. I had to figure it out the hard way because it wraps around this coolant nipple. And also there is a zip tie that holds it to this coolant nipple, and that's to keep it from getting too close to the exhaust manifold and getting fried. So you're gonna need to put that back when you're done. And okay, we are done for today, and I'll see you guys next weekend on. Good evening, everyone. Today is the end of a new day. So, progress since we last saw each other. The passenger, or the driver, and the passenger valve covers are now off. The passenger cover, there's some flash rust there. That's because it's just been so disgustingly humid. And I'll get that cleaned up before we put everything back together. But driver's side, not bad. Did not even have to take the fuel lines off. I had to do a little bit of body English to bend one slightly to get the clearance I needed. Otherwise, not bad. I used my flexi ratchet and a long 8 and a short 8, and worked from the front, worked from the back. It came off without too much of a fight. Not terrible. Now, oh, and I did a little body English on the dipstick tube to make a little clearance. This evil thing. Be prepared for a fight. Because of the air box, you have almost zero room, and the only way this comes out is to come towards the center of the engine. And because of that, and you may be able to tell, I had to remove the fuel rail, and I had to remove all the coils to get it out. Not only that, if you come up here, that is the cover for the airbox, and I had to slide it forward. You cannot remove it unless you break your AC lines, and I did not feel like recovering the system. Yeah, and most guys at home aren't going to be able to do that either. So pull this forward and you'll get just enough clearance that you can get room to get off the cam sprocket. On the flip side, if you want to work on cleaning your evaporator, there she blows right there, though I would suggest covering this up before you do that. All right. Now the good news is, looking at the cam lobes on both driver and passenger, they look pretty good. I don't see anything immediately wrong up there. I didn't expect to find anything immediately wrong up there. Other than it just being an absolute bear to get out. The actual removal, long 8, short 8 in the front, long 8, short 8 in the back, and then there's going to be 3 bolts on the lower side. You got to go in through the wheel well to get access, and I'll show you that here in a second. Actually, I'll go ahead and show you that. Hello, tire. All right. So you see that gap in there above the exhaust manifold? You got to reach in through there, because you can see some of the valve cover in there, right? See if I can zoom in a little bit for you. So you reach in through there, you've got 2 that you can see. You can put a short 8 on them, no problem. If you reach forward a little bit towards the front, there is a studded 8mm. You need a long 8 for. You can't see it, but you can feel it. And if you got a flexi head like I did, you can reach it. And this is just how you have to get the lower ones in the middle. Is up through. Good morning, everyone. Today is a new day. Let's pick up where we left off with the front timing case. You're going to have fasteners here, here, here. Where did it go? Oh, it goes down. Here, there's one where my finger is under the water pump. Here, 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 there, here, and then down in the corner, and then down in the other corner under where this little sensor spot is. Then there's one there, coming around. I think that's it. There also are 4 underneath going in the pan. I'll show you those. So as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4 sizes. These are going to be a mix of 13s. There's some nuts that are 15s. The studs up top are 18s, and then the studs that come in the bottom here are 22s. All right, so for getting this guy off, I just grabbed the tops up here and pulled. There is RTV at a couple of points, so you'll either have the seal is going to stay stuck to the RTV, or it'll come up and it's going to fight you. But in either case, if you've gotten everything out, this should come out relatively easily. Do be nice to it. There are some seals in it, and we're going to have to do some work on it later because we're going to have to replace the front oil seal, you know, a couple things like that. So let me finish getting the rest of this guy off and then see what we have going on here. All right, if you have never seen it, welcome to the timing setup on a 542 valve. So at a quick glance, this is how it works. We've got guides. The chain runs along the guide. The tensioner pushes against the guide, which pushes against the chain, which keeps the chain tight so there's no slop and you don't wind up with the chain jumping time. This thing's important because it links the spinning of the camshaft, which controls the valves, with the spinning of the crankshaft, which is what's driving the pistons. And you want to make sure that your pistons and valves are working together, because if they're not, you get backfires at best. At worst, you wind up with valves and pistons hitting each other, which results to broken metal in your cylinders, which results to an engine that eats itself very quickly. So topically, nothing appears to be wrong here. Our guides, both sides are here. They're not broken, which can happen if you go way too long without doing timing. But again, like I noticed, this slack side is awfully slack. And then this side's pretty tight, like it's supposed to be. But that's strange. So the tension side's nice and tight. But over here you'll notice, now it could be, I mean, even though what side is under tension and what side is not changes, it flip-flops. So for example, over here your slack side is on the bottom, so gravity's helping you, right? And then over here your slack side is on the top. But you'll notice that when I push on the slack non-tension side, it's not really moving. And over here kind of is. So I think we had something going on over here. Something not right. I mean, looking at the actual guide, I don't see that it's eating through it, which is good. That was what was going on with my truck. It was beginning to fail. So, cool. All right. This is the point where you need to bring your A game, because we're now at the place where if in the next series of steps, as we take this off, do the oil pump, and put this back on, that we screw up, when you put it all back together, you screw it up too bad, your engine will eat itself. And you'll have a, nice chunk of scrap iron right here. So, to make sure we're ready, we're focused, I wouldn't start doing this at 10 o'clock at night, something like that. And I'm going to get my laptop so that I can follow some instructions, because I don't have this internalized yet. And we're going to do it to it. Okay, little prelim here first. Let's tag our timing marks. So I took a white sticky pin type thing, tagged it there, and what they are is, see this right here, this is not, get out of the way, this is not the timing mark. This is basically the exciter for a sensor, the cam sensor that is in the timing cover. That's not your timing mark. This over here, there's an indentation in the outer edge that points. That's your timing mark. And you'll notice you don't have that big arrow thing because there's no sensor over here, but we do have that indentation. So I goop it with that to make it nice and easy to read. Down here, again, we have an indentation. That's your timing mark. So I'm gonna goop that later because I'm doing the oil pump, so I will be taking this sprocket off. I gotta get all that out of the way. But I will goop it later. So make sure you have those gooped, make it easy to see what your timing marks are. With that out of the way, first step is we need to rotate the crankshaft until the woodruff key, which is this little, if you imagine this is a haircut, this little mohawk looking thing. It's called a woodruff key, and we want this at 12 o'clock. So we want it pointing straight up. We're going to rotate the crank to the right. Do not rotate it to the left. So we'll rotate to the right, get it up to 12, and once that happens, we need to check our positioning of this cam gear and this cam gear. There's a specific spot we want those timing marks to be in, or close-ish. The number one thing is that we want this to be at 12 o'clock. So we're going to do that. Two ways to do this. You can either take your crank bolt, thread it back in, and turn it that way, or you can take a 32mm socket, which is what I recommend because it just makes everything easier, and turn it with a 32mm socket. Your call. So we're going to do that. All right, so we're at 12, but you'll notice that our timing marks both pointing down. What we want to see is when we're at 12 o'clock that our timing marks, the passenger should be at around, pointing at around 11, and the driver should be pointing at around 12. We're going to make that happen, but we want to get as close as we can. So what you can do if you're way off, which I am right now, is give it another rotation. Bring it back around to 12 again and see if you get a little closer on these marks. And then at that point, what we're actually going to do is we'll take those cam locks that I mentioned way at the beginning of this video, and we will lock the camshafts before we proceed with disassembling the chains and guides and components, so that we can, take everything off and work on replacement. All right, so we came back around. We're back at 12-ish. And you'll notice that's not quite 11 o'clock. I'd like it to hitch back, but that's really close. And this is more like 1 o'clock than 12 o'clock, but it's pretty close. So we're happy with that. Now we can proceed with locking down the cams. Okay, so I've got that in. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the tool I bought wasn't quite right. That's why it has all those washers in there as spacers to make it lock up tight. If you buy the OTC tool that Maka Loco mentions in his video, you should not have this issue. But got them in. You'll notice I had to slide that one back, partly because the oil dipstick tube was in the way. I had to undo the little bolt back on the side. That's it's an 8mm, so that I could even get this much clearance, kind of tuck it in, get out of the way so that I could get this in on the second one back. And there really was too much going on the first section back, whatever this is. So got that in on the second one back. I had room to do it first one back on this side. So there you go. Mine uses a 13mm bolt, but I believe I bought new bolts for this to make it custom so it actually would work. So anyway, make sure those are locked up tight. Next step is we're going to start taking out guides and tensioners, and then the chains will come out, and then that sprocket's going to come out. Oh, by the way, there's a tone ring for your crank position sensor that slides on in front of all that. So you take it out, set it aside. Now yours should have somewhere on it, should have either a rear stamp or a front stamp. Make sure you pay attention to that because it goes only in one way. You put it in backwards, your crank position sensor will not work, and you'll be very sad because you'll have to take your timing cover back off and the valve covers back off and tear all into this to either put the thing in or flip it over and put it in correctly. All right, tuck that out of the way. Okay, let's start taking things apart. Okay, tensioner's off. That's 2 10mm. Put a towel down under it. It's gonna pee some oil once you get it out. And they're in there tight, so when you hear it make that nice popping sound, that's okay. And once you do that, you can free the tensioner guide, which is this fella here. And looking at it, I do see there's a beginnings of a kind of a darker splotch right there. That was getting thin, but it wasn't gone. So this was okay for another little while, but it was starting to wear that down. So that gets us that. And then the guide is held in by a pair, I think, of 8mm. And pay attention when you take this out because one bolt's going to be long and one bolt's going to be short. Or it may not be, depending on what is the year of your vehicle when you're doing this. But my melling kit does actually have the longer bolt. There's an improvement that was made on the 3 valves, because the 2 valve, 3 valve, their timing setup is basically the same. So there's an improvement made where they made a bolt longer. So you may have 2 short bolts here, and then your new kit's going to have a long bolt. And we need to pay attention to what side that long bolt goes into. But once we get this off, this chain can come off. So, by the way, at this point, you have no tension on your chain. So, if nothing moved, congratulations, it means you've got your cam lock nice and tight. If suddenly the chain seemed to jerk or snap, it means you didn't tighten it enough and something has moved. And you may want to go revisit that and try to get that back in position. So, okay, little bit of a plot twist on this 97. So on my 2001 truck, there was one sprocket that had 2 sets of teeth for both chains. Now you notice this is not that. This is a single sprocket for a single chain, and then it has another sprocket for the other chain. So I think both the sprockets are the same, and what makes me say that is when you flip this over, you see that it's got a timing mark that's embossed on both sides. I already gooped the one on this side, and you see that's a witness mark about where it was in relation to the other sprocket, because that's where the other sprocket's timing mark is. So the timing marks are supposed to line up, which makes sense. You may be wondering, well, how do you make sure that these things stay true? And what that's going to do, what's going to do that for you is the Woodruff key slot. So that's super important right there. The Woodruff key slot is going to ensure that your timing marks stay lined up with both of these sprockets. Now what I'm going to do to make sure I keep the sprocket order the same, I've put one mark over here on the front, and I gooped all this, so I know this is the front and I know this is the first one or the outside one. And I'm going to put 2 marks on that second one there so that I'll know it's the second one, and I'll mark its front as well so I know what direction to install these and in what order to install these. Put a little plot twist there. As we're taking this apart, you may want to make a quick note before you pull one of your tensioners. That one's stamped with an L, so L is driver's side. And the one you just pulled was stamped with an R, means passenger side. So just keep that in mind, and we're gonna go ahead and pull out all the driver's components. The guide on this side, it had 2 short bolts, which kind of doesn't surprise me. So the milling kit I have, again, has the improvement, and I'll make sure to show you which one gets the long bolt. All right, I want to show you something. I didn't see this on my truck. You see that? That is thick, goopy, nasty oil. The other side was not like this. And then when you look in here, this might have been what was causing the problem. That's pretty nasty. That shouldn't be that way. This might be sludge oil that got pinned in here when I first got this thing and started bringing it back to life, and it just never could thin out. It never could get the garbage back out. So we'll clean all that up. And I'm now really curious to see what the oil pump looks like, because when you take this guide out down here, one of the bolts you take out goes through the oil pump. That's why it's really long. And you'll see that when you go to do this. And it was completely covered in oil. I don't remember that being that way on my truck. So I don't know if there's something up with the pump, or I just don't remember. Anyway, this tensioner is going to fight you a bit. So you're just going to have to kind of wheedle it out. You may even have to get like a pry bar to get it out. Get that out, and then we can get this guide out now. And then we can get the chain out, the chain and the other sprocket. Okay, here we go. So again, when you take all this off, if this doesn't move, good, your cam lock's good. If it moved, then you're a little bit loose, you need to fix that. All right, this is where you should be now. You should have your guide and your tensioner thing removed, and you should just have a bare front of the block. Because for me, my next goal is this oil pump. Now, if you're not doing your oil pump, okay, cool, whatever. Just tune back in a couple of minutes, skip ahead to where I've got the new pump in, and we are working on putting the timing stuff back on. But if you are here for the oil pump, then let's do an oil pump. So we've got a couple of bolts on the front of the pump. We've got one here. There's one right there. There's the one we took out already because of the guide. I want to say there is one more somewhere on the front. Oh, right here. There's one right there. So yeah, you got a total of 4 bolts, but we also need to disconnect the pickup tube, which is down here. Okay. Now there are 2 8mm bolts that need to come out, and you can get them both at least started with a flexi wrench. You pretty much need a flexi wrench for this part of the job. This is what lets you take the oil pump off and replace it without needing to drop the pan. So flexi wrench, if you've never seen one, this guy. The box end will ratchet, and it will also bend. So you're gonna need this, and you're probably, when you go to remove it and it is buried under all this stuff in here, you're gonna need like a trim removal tool, or sometimes they're called a cat's claw. One of these. You're gonna need one of these. But we're not there yet. So we want to remove the pickup tube before we take those other bolts in the front off, so that way we have something we can pull against, right? We don't want the oil pump jiggling around as we're trying to fight with the pickup tube. So tube first, bolts in the front second. As I said, the 2 bolts are 8mm. You're gonna need a flexi. You can get your fingers in there to get it out. This is definitely easier in a truck. I recommend a step stool, or you're going to need to canoodle your way up in from the bottom, which I don't know how you would do it without removing your tie rod so you could actually sit in here. I don't want to do that, so I'm coming in from the top, and wish me luck. Because the one on the left there, he's not bad. You can get on him pretty easy. He's not bad at all. The one on the right, he's a pain. He's the guy who's real fun to reinstall too. Good news is the tube is flexible. So once we get it off, we can just kind of push it out of the way. Not a big deal. Do keep in mind that there's going to be a little O-ring in there. So make sure it's there. Make sure you don't lose it. A good timing kit, an oil pump kit, is going to have a new O-ring. So we'll swap that out when we get there. Let's get this done. All right. Again, sorry for the lighting. The sun's trying to burn my eyeballs out. Here's our old pump. Those 3 8mm are all the same length, so it doesn't really matter what order you take them out in. Just wanted to point out a few things. This is a kind of a gear-driven pump, so this gear spins around when it's being spun by the crankshaft. That creates your pumping action. This is your output right here. So this is the oil that gets pressurized and then sent out to the engine. And then your input is where that pickup tube came in, right over here. And, well, that's how it works. Now, I don't know if this thing was bad or worn or what, but I do know this. I know that this metal backing plate is supposed to create our seal so that oil is not leaking. And I know that when I pulled all these bolts out, they were completely coated in oil. So I don't know if this was leaking or what. But this is the old one. When you go to take it out, it's going to try to pee out oil from here. There is an anti-drain back valve that's kind of on this side of the system right here that's supposed to keep oil in the pump. So that's why you can, crank your car, drive it, whatever, walk away for 3 days a week and go to crank it, and it pretty much fires right back up because it maintains enough oil for prime up in here. So what we're going to do on the new one is we'll take this backing plate off. We're going to pack some oil in here just so it's not running dry when we prime. And then what I'm going to do, learning from what happened on my truck, I'm going to try to pack as much oil in here as I can, even if it's to the point where I got some oil peeing out over here, so that hopefully when I go to prime it, it primes and I don't have to do shenanigans and backfill and do all other sorts of crazy stuff that I had to do to get my truck working. So let me go show you the pickup, how you're supposed to pop that out. Okay, there's our tube. And like I said, it does wiggle. Now, it should be that you can take a cat claw or something and you push down on this little lip right here and it'll pop it loose. Did not want to do that for me. It fought hard. So I wound up having to hook a tool kind of behind the pickup tube and then pushed on it the best I could. And that finally got it to loosen up a little bit. And with that, I was then able to finally pop it loose. But once you pop it out of the way, pump slides off nice and easy. All right. If you made it this far, congratulations. The taking off and putting back on of the pickup tube, in my opinion, is the hardest part of this entire job, because you got to do that one bolt essentially blind. So it's kind of gnarly. Okay, at this point, what's so cool about this one point here is from here on out, we're putting things back together. We're done taking things apart. We finally got down to where we needed to get down to, and we can do the job. So this is a good opportunity. Pat yourself on the back. Go get a cold beverage, whatever. I'm about to. It's kind of hot today. And then we'll grab the new pump and we'll start doing what we got to do to it. And then we'll install it, put that pickup tube back on, replace the O-ring there, and just start putting it all back together. One recommendation, and I'll say it again when we get there. After we get the pump reinstalled, before we go any further, let's go ahead and we're going to clean all this gasket surface up in here. Now we can go ahead and clean the gasket surface on the valve covers too. You really don't need to do much. Just get the schmoo off so that when you lay down your fresh gasket that, you know, it's not sitting on schmoo. And you don't really, the only places you need to get a scraper out, honestly, truly, where brake clean won't take care of it, is where the RTV was, like right here. So we'll get all that done, then put our timing kit back in. And then we, you know, just move forward. Because there's going to be a couple of steps that I'm going to skip that I had done on my truck that I'm not going to do on this van because it is so much lower mile than the truck. 80,000 miles versus 280,000 miles. So hopefully speed things up. I have to have this done tonight. Even if it's 11 o'clock at night, I have to have it done tonight. I need 2 vehicles tomorrow. First thing we want to do is go ahead, get your old pickup tube O-ring out. That's this guy. It's very easy to do. If you get a pick in it, just kind of wiggle under it like this, and eventually you'll get it up and out. And there should be a new O-ring that comes with your kit. Make sure you lube up your new O-ring with some engine oil before you put it down there. As you can see, there we go. Not a big deal. Next up, we need to take the backing plate off of our new pump so that we can go ahead and prime it up a little bit. And for that, we're going to need some Torx. And I happen to have a Torx kit here. And I don't remember what size it is. So we're going to bring it over there and we're going to figure it out, and then I'll get a tool to bear because they're pretty tight so we can get this done. All right, size we're going to need is a T30, and what I'm going to do so I can get through this relatively quickly, because it was kind of weird using a ratchet, is I've got a converter to go from 1/2 to 3/8, which is what I need for my T30. Then we're going to pop these guys out. All right, here's the meat and taters. This is what makes it all happen right here. Does this. Gets spun, slides onto the crankshaft on these flats, and it spins around and turns this. And that's how you pump. So again, this is the pickup tube side, so the oil gets drawn up in here. And then over here, and with that spring, this is your anti-drain back stuff. This is a high flow pump, which for the 2 valve, it's only an 8% improvement. You get a much more significant improvement with the 3 valve high flow pump, but I'm going to take whatever I can get. And like I said, we're going to drizzle oil in here, and then we're going to pack in some oil up in here, so fingers crossed I don't have to do ridiculous things to get this to prime, because the idea is you get all this back together and you should just be able to turn the key for roughly 30 seconds and you should get prime and get oil, and you should see your pressure gauge go boink on the dash and you're good. But if you don't get that, well, then you have to do silly stuff. Also, let's try to keep, this is a sealing surface, right? So we want to do everything we can to keep this sealing surface clean. Don't let this sit in the dirt, or if you do, make sure you wipe it down before you put it back on. All right, let's go get oil. Let's do this. Throw it back together. Again, T30s. Again, Ugga-Duggas are your friend. And let's do this. All right, here's what I've got going on. You'll notice now this spins real easy. I've got oil all up in here, and most importantly, where the anti-drain back is up in here, I've got oil already up in there. And you're gonna make a mess when you do this because that's a hole going straight through. I got a little oil that seeped onto this side. Again, that's gonna pee a bit, but we wanna fill that up. Be careful we don't pour it out of this side. which goes up against the block. And we'll put our cover back on, tighten it back up, and I'm hoping that because we actually have oil up in here, and I did not do this last time, that will be good. We shall see. All right, remember, before we put this on, something to keep in mind is you've got these two flats I'm rubbing my fingers on, and you need those to line up on the crankshaft. And let me show you what it looks like on the crank. All right, check it out. So over here on the side, you see that flat? In the very back, see that flat that kind of curves in? That's what needs to line up on the other side of the pump to make sure you get it seated. Another thing that this is a good opportunity for is look in the front of your oil pan. If you see any schmoo you think needs to come out, go ahead and get that out. You know, maybe get a rag with some brake clean and go ahead and wipe that clean. Now is a good time to do it because the pump's not there, and it gets a little harder to do once the pump's back in. So after you get your pump back in, after you clean that schmoo out, a good suggestion is shove a bunch of rags in there so that as you work on cleaning other parts of the exposed block and whatever, and those bits don't wind up falling in your pan again. As I talked about a moment ago, you'll know you'll have the pump seated when you can see that collar sticking out. So you've got a Woodruff key, right? And then there's a collar behind it. When the pump is fully seated, you're going to see some collar. If you don't see any collar, the pump is not seated. It's going to feel like it's seated, but it's not. You're seated when you have this look. And then if we look down here, take a look at our pickup tube. It just drops right in. And if you cannot get the pickup tube just to drop right in, if you're sitting there and you're pulling it left and right and up and down trying to shove it in the hole, the pump is not seated. Fiddle fart around to get that internal gear to spin around just right to sit on the flats of the collar of the crank, and that'll get you seated. And don't forget to try to top off the the anti-drain back thing, which is over there, so that this thing will be primed. See, we're dripping a little oil right there. That's fine. Anyway, that's finally it. We got it. I've been fighting with this for probably 30-45 minutes. Okay, now comes the next tricky part, which is we got to get our pickup tube screws back in. As with the first go round, the one on the left, not bad. One on the right, yeah, that one's a little harder. So we're going to do the one on the left first, only do it finger tight. Do not try to run this guy in. We want to make sure that we have some wiggle room so we can get our other guy to start threading and then get it in. One thing I forgot to mention, get your oil pump screw bolts back in first so that the oil pump's not wiggling when you try to get your pickup in. So as a reminder, that was these three 8mm. They're the same length. They can go in any particular order. And you'll put them in the bolts except for this guy. This guy is a bolt that comes in through a guide arm on the timing chain. So leave him empty, but the other three, go ahead and put them back in. And there is an official torque value, so right now just make them snug, and when we're all said and done, we'll get the torque wrench out and we'll get them to where they need to be. Okie doke. So here's what we got to do for our second, much tougher pickup bolt. You're going to make sure you have your flexi set right. I'm going to show you up here. Okay. You may or may not be able to get the flexi in, but you're going to do this. Okay. And then what you may have to do, because at first there's not going to be enough tension to make it ratchet, so you're going to take your cat claw and you're going to push it underneath like that to provide that needed tension so you can get the first couple threads in, right? And then, and you know this because you took it out, you're going to take your fingers and you're going to work it until it's high enough that you can actually get your flexi in. Alternatively, if you cannot get the flexi in, you got to do this by finger. Do that, right? The idea is we're trying to get enough tension somehow, some way, so we can get the first thread or two in so this won't fall out into the oil pan. So that's the general idea. Godspeed to you, because it's not fun and I can't really show it on camera. So good luck. Okay, so let's get to those torque values. The two very evil pickup bolts here, pickup tube bolts, they're supposed to be 89 inch-pounds, but honestly, just get them snug. I don't know of a way, I'll put it this way, I do not know of a way you're going to get a torque wrench in there. Now, the other three bolts on the oil pump, again, 89 inch-pounds. Note I said inch-pound, not foot-pound. So what I'm going to do is slightly higher than rated. I'm going to do 8 foot-pounds, which would be 96 inch-pounds. I think that's not going to break the bank. And these can be tightened in any particular order, and you probably want to hit them 2 or 3 times and make sure they're snug, because as I mentioned, that metal plate on the back of this thing is supposed to make a seal against the block. So you want it nice, uniform, tight. And after we do this, we're going to shove our rag and we're going to clean. And after we clean, we're going to start putting timing components back in. Alright, so cleaning. There are a couple of places where you had the heads joining the block and this and that and the other, so some RTV was put down to keep oil from leaking. So in those places, one there, there's 2 up top where the, sorry there's crap in the way, but 2 up top where the timing case completed, where the valve cover sits. There's 2 up top on this side. There's 2 where the cylinder head joins the block, there and there. And then I covered those 2 with rags, but there are 2 where the timing cover meets the oil pan. So what we're gonna do, and I just dropped something I'm sure that's important, is we're just gonna use a regular old straight razor and get that glue out, and then over the rest of our surfaces, because the van actually looks fairly clean, we're just going to take some rags and some brake clean and we're just going to wipe everything down. And on the valve covers, same deal. All I'm going to do is, I already did it on this side, I cleaned out the shmoo on the high side so that it can't fall into the valley, or the, well, you get the point, so it can't fall inside the valve train. And over here, same deal, just going to clean the shmoo around the sealing surfaces, hit it with some brake clean, and that's really all I'm doing here. And once all of our cleaning is done, if you're motivated and you're getting all this done in one day, you won't need to come out here and hit this again. I had to clean my truck multiple times because it took me 2 weeks to do this. Not happening today, it's all happening today. So yeah, we're gonna clean. And after we do all that, then we can finally start the procedures for installing our timing stuff. All right, so the next thing that needs to happen is we need to turn the crank to 10 degrees for top dead center. That's what this specialty tool is for. It is designed to go around this little alignment dowel in the case. So this needs to be turned counterclockwise until this hole can easily slide on and off of this alignment dowel. And once you can do that, the crank is ready, and then we're going to install some pieces and lay chain. And just give you a heads up, I have run into an issue. I'm not sure how to fix it yet. I was expecting this to have a pocket for a 3/8 drive like my truck did. It does not. It's some sort of weird spline that they used to turn this, or maybe they had a tool that grabbed onto the gear and turned. So I'm not sure how to turn these cam gears, and unless you are extraordinarily lucky, you're gonna need to turn them at least a little bit. And if they're under spring pressure, well, you're gonna need something with a little mustard, because they're gonna want to turn to the right. That's what the valves are gonna do. The springs are. Still thinking of a plan here. Still trying to figure out how I want to do this. I'm thinking if you've got a chain style oil filter wrench, that would probably get it done. I may be trying to find one of those right quick and go grab one. And hopefully the teeth spacing is far enough apart that we can use that to manipulate things, which I just thought about it. We cannot, because we're gonna have a chain on the sprocket teeth, the actual timing chain. So that's not gonna work, because then you're down to ideas I don't like locking on vice grips like this and then trying to manipulate it that way. I really don't like that idea. It may be what winds up happening. We'll see what happens. Also, I talked about this before, but if this were a Ford chain, there would be a blue coloring where the link for the timing mark on the sprocket on the crank is supposed to line up, and then our two timing links that are on the cam. But we don't have that, so in a melling kit you just get this smooth, super shiny piece. So what I do, same thing as before, I goop it. So that way we know exactly what's supposed to line up where. And you're gonna need to do this on both chains, and keep in mind that the inside of the chain is not gonna have that shiny link. See, check this out. No shiny, but we have shiny. So only the side that would be facing you on installation has that shiny piece. So make sure that you catch that and you mark it, so that when you go to do lineup, you'll be all right. All right, check it out. This is how you should look. You should be kind of roughly at the 11 o'clock position on the Woodruff key, and then you should be just sitting inside of this, and it should just slide on and off that easy. Now you may notice the end of my thing is chewed up a little bit. It's because it was catching on the air conditioner, so I had to grind about 1 millimeter off. But now that's fitting on perfectly. So we've got the crank where it needs to be. And I will say this, you're supposed to have, remember this is supposed to be at 11 o'clock and this is supposed to be at 12 o'clock. So at this point you're supposed to bring that to 11 and bring that to 12. I figured out a way to do this. It is super janky. Put 2 bolts in it. And you may have to back them out a bit, right, so that it can turn. But then take a big screwdriver and you can move it either direction. Again, super janky, but it should work. And the bolts are strong enough that you should be able to put, some pressure on them and it's not going to fail. So that's my solution for that. I'm not going to do this particular adjustment, because what I found when I did the truck, and it was very similar to this, is I set it to those positions, and then when I put everything together, I basically had to move the cams back to where they were in the beginning. And that was the line up, because that's what the chain told me. And there you go. So I'm going to try to skip that alignment. I know I'm already pretty close. The whole point of that is, in a perfect world, you do the 11 o'clock on the passenger side, you do the 12 o'clock on the driver's side, and when you go to throw your chain on, it lines up perfect. You know, bango presto, you're good to go. That's not generally how it works. Okay. All that said, we're going to put in our chain guides first. So we're going to put in the passenger chain guide first, and trying to figure out where our screw hole is. I'll be able to lay it in and see, but basically that long bolt I mentioned, it goes up top on the passenger, and I'll show you that. All right, specific melding part number is BG414P. You'll notice it comes with that long bolt. It's going to go in the top. You'll see that this thing's floating around. Not a big deal. You just push it in, it goes in one way, and then we go ahead and install the part. All right, so driver's side, our part is BG413P. And remember, this is actually an oil pump bolt. So that long bolt goes in the bottom, and that little dude goes up top. I believe these are tightened at, again, 89 inch-pounds, so 8 foot-pounds should be fine. Right, you don't want to go too crazy on these because they're not big bolts, right? But get those torqued up, and then we'll go to the next step. Okay, here's the moment you've all been waiting for. We're going to start laying chain. Okay? So we're going to start with 2, because that was the inside one, right? We're going to slide it on, and where we have our timing mark is where the single link that I goobered a few minutes ago is going to go. And then we're going to run it, looking at this chain here, we're going to run this along the guide that we just installed, and this is going to be the driver's side chain, okay? Not passenger, driver's. And we're going to run this. We're going to make sure that our color link does not leave our timing mark. We're going to put it on, and we're going to see how close we are with our other 2 links on the cam. All right, with everything aligned appropriately at the bottom, you can see we're off. The cam gear needs to come over about 2 links, or about 2 teeth. That's what we need to have happen. And you may say, well, what about this slack down here? Well, if you pull that slack as tight as you can, and you try to massage this, it's not quite enough to bring it over a tooth. So we're as tight as we should be. Your timing mark should be pointing at 6 o'clock, straight down at the pan. You can crawl under the van and check it, but we're off slightly. Need to come back. So what you have to do at this point is take your chain back off, because we do not want our cam or our crank to move at all. So we take our chain back off. We're going to loosen our hold down a hair, not much, and then we're going to try to move it. And we don't need to move it much. And there you have it. My really dumb idea worked. So I took these, put them in about like that, because I knew I had room, so I didn't have to sit it on the threads. I then took a pretty large Phillips or flathead, hooked in like this, and just leaned on it after I had loosened these 2 about a 1/4 turn. It doesn't take much, just a 1/4. And sure enough, I was able to move it and then put it back in, and now we are good. As long as we didn't lose alignment down at the crank. So let's make sure that we're still on our link, our timing link at the crank. If we are, then we're golden. All right, so I know it's a little tricky to see, but you can see because it's at 6 o'clock, the link is kind of dangling, right? See if I can zoom in for you. It's dangling, but that's the correct alignment. If I had a free hand, you could pull that tight and our link would be lined up on the correct sprocket. So boom, that's 1 out of 2 aligned. All right, next step is we need to loosen our cam lock again. Same deal, about a 1/4 turn each. And then I'm gonna get my screwdriver and bolts back out, and we're gonna pull all the slack out of this side, and then we're gonna tighten it back up. Remember, we wanna pull the slack, but we do not want to turn the crank sprocket. That does not need to move, okay? We're just pulling slack, so don't get too crazy. All right, chain guide time, or tensioner time. So we know the driver's tensioner is the driver's tensioner because it's got this little plastic hump. So I'm gonna put this guy in. It's gonna go in. Remember, sitting on that big pin there, right? So you're gonna kind of slide it in and then get the chain centered underneath it, and then we're gonna break loose with our tensioner. And the one we need for the driver's side is the one that's got the L stamped on it. That is our driver's tensioner. If you don't believe me, you can check the witness marks of the shape of the oil reservoir thing against what you got on the block. Review your footage. Hopefully you took some pictures before you kept going willy-nilly. And then we'll put this guy in, and once we can get the bolts in and all that jazz, then we pull the pin. Do not pull the pin until the tensioner is 100% ready to go. Pulling the pin's the very last thing that you do, so resist the urge. All right, a couple of noteworthy things. We got it in. It's tight. You're gonna have to fight with it, but it will go, providing, and this is important, that you have enough slack up top. If you didn't tighten this bottom enough, you didn't pull it tight enough, you won't have enough slack up top to install the tensioner and the tensioner guide. Just won't happen. So if you just absolutely cannot get this thing in, you may want to go back and check that out. And in other news, the blood sacrifice has occurred. Getting that in, so that means this project will be successful. So these get tightened to 18 foot-pounds. So I'm going to do that, then I'll pull the pin. And after we do all that, one side is done. You've seen how to do it. Repeat the process over here. Okay, if you made it this far, I congratulate you, because we're done timing. But before we do anything else, before we release our cam locks or anything like that, we want to double, triple check everything. So ensure that on the passenger side cam, that your timing mark is between the timing links on the chain. Ensure that you are tight all through here and all through here. Ensure that the chain is sitting in between the guide rails. Ensure that your tensioner is installed in its pocket and that the tensioner bolts are tightened to 18 foot-pounds. Ensure that when you come down here and you look, that your timing mark is still lined up with your timing link, which it is. And you would need to have already done that because of how this is set up. You're going to need to have already done that on your driver's chain on the truck, where it's just one big sprocket. If you got one, you got the other. But this one, you have two separate sprockets. So, and also because of that, you need to make sure that these are slid next to each other to make room, because remember, you still have a tone ring that has to go on here. So then come on over to the driver's side. Again, tensioner in the pocket, right? Bolts tightened to 18 foot-pounds, grenade pin pulled out, chain sitting in the guide, timing mark lined up with timing links that we're as tight as we can. I really wish I could get that a hair tighter, but we're good and tight up here, and everything looks as it should. If everything looks as it should and you've done all your sanity checks, you can go ahead and remove your cam locks because you have completed the timing of your engine. Now what I suggest you do, and what I'm gonna do, is I'm gonna take that 32mm socket, I'm gonna bar over the crank a full 2 revolutions, and I'm gonna be listening and feeling for any kind of weird clunks, bangs, tight spots, anything that would indicate to me that I have goofed up the timing and that I need to go back and redo something before moving forward. Okay, I did 2 full turns of the crank. Feels great, sounds great. I think we got it. So now we need to go ahead and prep our timing cover. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, since this seal only has 80,000 miles on it and it's very pliable and not torn anywhere, I'm not replacing this front seal. But if this was, 200,000 miles and it was time for a new front seal, this is the point where you would do it. You would knock this out, put a new one in, knock it in, press it in if you have a press, but not doing that. So just putting that out there for everybody. All right. So what we need to do is what we did when we did clean up on the block side. Get some brake clean in here. Just kind of wipe this down, get the schmoo off. And remember, you're going to have some RTV, some of that sealant glue at the edges on both sides, like that. And you need to get a blade, scrape that up. And then we have our new gasket kit. So this has got our 2 gaskets I will be using. Like I said, that's going to get saved for a rainy day. Kit, I'll list it again, TCS 45982. When you go to put these in, you want to start at the ends and work your way towards the middle. If you start at one end and you work your way down, you'll stretch it as you go and then stuff won't fit. So get that done, and then we're going to go ahead, we're going to get our RTV out right here, and we're going to goober up the block, and we're going to throw this cover on. All right, guys, before we put our front timing cover back on, a couple of things to note. You need to take your rags out in the bottom. This is your last opportunity to clean any of the internals. So if you see too many crusties or anything like that, now's your time to clean it. This is also your very last final time to make sure anything you want to do the timing, which, yeah. Let's see here. Also remember, before you put the front cover back on, you're going to have to apply RTV at 1, 2, 3, and on the other side of that, 4, and then 5, and then 6. You do not need to do the top yet for the valve covers. So we got to get the front cover back on first. Okay? But this is your last opportunity to clean, last opportunity to do anything with your timing, and we need to get the goop in. Now, when you go to put your front cover back on, you see this alignment dowel? There's 2 of them. We already used the one over here when we were doing our alignment tool, right, for the timing. And those are alignment dowels actually for the front cover. So when you go to put this on, you're going to want to handle it in such a way that you kind of drop it in and you take care of getting onto, I actually put in the picture, these dowels. Also, if you did a little bit of test spinning, make sure you take your crank bolt back out. That needs to come out. And also, before you put the cover back on, you need to put your tone ring for the crankshaft sensor back on. No tone ring, sensor doesn't work, car will not start. So that's what we need to do. We're going to get her done. We're going to get this case back on. And I went and I've got a nice diagram printed out of what bolts go where and then what their torque values are. So we can get these torqued up. These are really the last things you need to worry about torque, because the valve covers, let's be honest, we're just going to do the best we can. And then we're just going to keep putting it back together. So RTV's been applied. The cover is back on. I have all the bolts in finger tight. If you've never done this procedure before, you're going to get all your bolts in finger tight. You're going to wait 20-30 minutes, get the RTV time to skim. It reacts to oxygen, but humidity and temp do play a factor. So on a hot, wet day like this, it'll skin faster than the temperatures were cooler and drier. So we'll give it 20-30 minutes and then we do our torque sequence. So I got to go get that page off the printer. And we are back where we started this morning. I am hopeful. Like I said, I need to get this done today. I'm hoping that I can still get this done. Might be a late night, but get it all done in one day. So get me a bite to eat real quick, get that printer printed out, and then we'll torque this down. And once this is torqued down, we're going to switch gears over to our valve covers, which, if you've been following along, they've already been cleaned. And you've already taken care of the RTV mess that's on either side. And we're going to change out the gaskets. Shouldn't really need, because we're changing out gaskets, we're not going to need to clean the other side unless there's a little RTV somewhere. We'll get that off real quick. And then we put our valve covers back on. And we just keep moving. So once the valve covers are back on, you're looking at 2-3 hours of work. And speaking of that, so once I get the valve covers back on and I show you what you need to do with the RTV there, unless there's something weird on the reassembly, I'm not really going to film it, because I told you what to do on the disassembly and I showed you key things when they needed to happen. I know you haven't seen a lot of me actually turning a wrench in this video, and that is because I am deeply pressed on time. I do not have time to do that kind of filming right now. And if you really want to see that kind of filming, look at my other timing video for my truck. The timing part is basically identical. Getting all the crap out of the way is pretty similar. I highly recommend you go watch that one. I had more time. It's a 3-hour long video. Has tons of amazing information in it. So I will put that in the description. Okay, here we go. Now, the sizes you're gonna need, if you don't remember, you're gonna need a 22, you're gonna need a 13, you're gonna need an 18. Now, my torque driver, is a 3/8 drive, which is why I have this converter, because this is a 1/2 socket. So we can do the needful, right? Here's our guide. So basically how this works is you do all your little dudes first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then you do your bottoms, 6, 7. And then you do your medium dudes. So 8, 9, 10. Then you're going to do your studs up top, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay, so we're going to need that, and these all have different torque values as well. Check it out. So there's 3 stages of torque here. So little dudes get tightened to 18 foot-pounds. The medium dudes get tightened to 35. And then all of your studs, sorry, not your medium dudes, those are your bottom studs. And then everybody else, again, 35 foot-pounds. So do that, then that, then that, and then do it again. So that's what we're going to do. After that is done, we can move forward to the valve covers. All right, valve covers. We need to put new gaskets on there, and they are somewhat captive, so you're going to have to actually feed out the old, put in the new. When you feed out the old, the bolts are going to fall out. So this is a good opportunity, if you haven't already done it, mark where your studs go. I didn't do this on the truck. I wound up with a stud in a really bad spot, and that almost sunk me, but I got through it. So I already marked this, so I know where my studs are, so I can put things back correctly. Our valve covers are VS50481R. And like I said, I found the best way to do this to get these tucked under the screw assembly, because it's a screw and it's also this little thingy plug. Lack of words here, I'm kind of getting tired. Take a screwdriver and make sure you get that fed under it, and then it'll just kind of pop up, and then you're good. Get this swapped out on both. Inspect the valve cover to see if there's any RTV you need to clean off it. Otherwise, you're good to go. And then go ahead and throw it back on. I realized my earlier explanation was kind of terrible, and I apologize. I'm getting pretty tired. I've been on this since about 8 o'clock this morning. So, you see how we have these two plastic tabs here? So what you do is you push this up, kind of lean it one direction, take your screwdriver, tuck that in under one side of the lip, and then you're going to flip it the other way, tuck in the other side, and it'll just pop in, and that's it. You're done. You move on to the next one. That is a better explanation of what you need to do for the valve covers. All right, here is my plan for the valve cover here. So this is just sitting here right now. I was mocking it up to make sure I could get everything in, and everything has dropped in, more or less. So here's what we're going to do. Now that I've done that, I will lift it up and I will goop our two places we need to goop. That's one of them right there. You see how there's a pad right there? So we're going to lay goop along the crack, and then the pad sits in the goop, and that's that. Prevent leaks. So what we're also going to do is we're going to get our 8mm stuff ready, and we'll just finger tight the first couple in the front around the cam sprocket, right? And then same deal, give it 20-30 minutes. Take that time, finish getting the rest of it finger tight, whatever, and then come in for the kill, right? Get it snug. Technically these are 89 inch-pounds or 8 foot-pounds, but you know, just kind of do what you can because it's a pain. But that is my general plan on how I'm going to do this. I'll do the same to the driver's valve cover. And once those are in and tightened up, we can start rebuilding everything. Like we got to slide this cover back on. We got to put the battery tray back in. There's, well, I can't put that bracket on yet, but there's a nut that goes on in that stud. Over here, we got to put the oil dipstick tube. We got to straighten that out. We got to put the EGR pipe back in. We got to put our fuel injectors and our coils back in. So we still have quite a bit to do. But the good news is once the valve covers are back on, now you're down to just, you're doing harness stuff, and you got to put all the front stuff back on. So the trickiest of the front stuff is going to be probably reattaching the power steering and the the crank, because we're going to need to put a little goop on the crank bolt washer for right where you see the woodruff key to keep that from leaking. So we're getting there. All right, let me get back to it. Okay, updates. So to get this box back together, there's a metal piece that I think basically is the back that a screw screws into at the bottom. And I just took that piece out because I couldn't get the box to line up correctly. And one screw is not going to hurt it. And I put that metal piece over here. There it is. Right there, so you're gonna wind up with one extra screw. But the box is back together, which means we now have our battery tray, which also means we're getting coils back in and fuel injectors back in. I just wanted to let you guys know about that. My phone is also running out of storage, so again, very periodic updates based on things that kind of surprised me like this did. Good morning, everyone. Today is a new day. I had to wave the white flag about 10:30 last night. There was still just too much to do. So here's where we stand right now. As you can see, I have the passenger valve cover area just completely rebuilt in its entirety. We've got the transmission dipsticks back in. We got the oil fill is back in. My goofy AC mod is back in. All the electrical has been redone. Got all the plumbing redone back there. Everything's back up. The only thing that is kind of weird right now is this is the feed line for the vacuum for the HVAC, and I can't find the other end of the line. It should be up in here somewhere, but it's disappeared. So that might turn into a thing that I'm gonna have to tinker on. Over here, I just finished seating the driver's valve cover. Remember where there's that split between the timing case and the cylinder head, you got to put some goop and then follow the goop procedures, right? So you got that done, and you'll notice on the front here, I have rebuilt the passenger side of the front. So we got the tensioner back in, the idler's back on. I've got the water pump pulley back on. The crank pulley is back on. So about the crank pulley, when you go to put it back on, unless you've got a specialty tool, you got to press it back on. So what I normally do is I get it lined up, I wiggle it in slightly, and then I get a hammer and a block, and then I will start tapping it on, and I'll tap it on until I can get the crank bolt in. And then I use the crank bolt to fully seat the crank pulley. And you can compare against the alternator to let you know when you got it seated that you did it right, because these two should be in the same alignment, right? And also don't forget, so you don't get an oil leak out of your woodruff key, that when you go to put this crank bolt in for your final tightening, put some RTV on the back of the washer, so that won't leak. All right, so now that this is done, I'm gonna get the engine oil dipstick straightened out. There's a bolt I need to reinsert down there. And then we're gonna get the EGR tube back on. And after the EGR tube goes on, we're just back to straightening out all the electronics that we pulled out. So run the harnesses back forward. Don't forget, you've got connections hither and thither. There's one here. You've got your ECT up here. And you've got the cam position sensor here. So you got to take care of all that. And then what's left after that is we get our power steering pump back in position. We put this hose back on. And then at that point, we're pretty close to done. If I could find my mysterious disappearing vacuum line. That's bugging me quite a bit. I don't know how it would just up and disappear. because this is an aside, but your vacuum source is here. It's the throttle body, right? So when you were taking all this apart, you would have pulled a big connector off the back of the throttle body that splits off to about 5 different vacuum lines. Some of them go to feed stuff on the back of the engine, and then some of them go down some tubing and go straight down. If you look straight down under the vehicle, there is a big vacuum reservoir. And then there's lines that come off it. One of those lines has to come back up around here somewhere to be the feed for the HVAC. I just don't know where it went. As you can tell, it's bugging me. Oh, one other thing. When you go to do your EGR, make sure that you coat wherever you're going to thread in, coat it with a liberal coating of copper anti-seize. Okay? Copper. Because that's high temp. Do that, and if you ever have to take the EGR off again, maybe, fingers crossed, you're not going to need an air hammer and nearly destroy it to get it off. So this is our copper anti-seize. And I also mentioned it maybe in passing, but I don't know where I put it, but I bought a 32 millimeters crow's foot that I will be using to tighten this nut up. It's right in front of me, this guy. So you put a 1/2 drive in, and then you can actually work on turning it from above, which is what we're going to need because we don't have a lot of room in there to tighten that back up. So I'm going to use that and just slather both sides of the connection and anti-seize. My suggestion is slather the exhaust manifold in, get the part in, get it roughly positioned, get the exhaust manifold in started. Then you can work on the other side, slather it up, get it connected. Once you have both connected, then tighten it down. So that is the plan, because we get this out of the way. This really is the last major, I'm not sure how it's going to go part. Everything else I've done before, not a big deal. All right, updates. As you can see, I'm starting to run the electrical here. Get that right there. And I managed to get the EGR in. That was not fun at all. What I wound up doing to tighten it is I didn't have room to get a socket in there. So what I did is I did a stubby 1/2 and I held it like this. So I had a handle and used that to pull so I could actually tighten it up. So still use the crow's foot, just not necessarily in the way it was meant. Got it as tight as I could to the point where I think I just pulled a muscle in my rib. It's great, but hopefully that's what we need, so that's not leaking and I'm not throwing EGR codes. So now just get all this electrical finished out. Let me show you something real quick. So there's this little dude that you probably kind of wondering, what is this dude all about? That's this guy, and he's very easy to forget. Now what this guy is it's an EMI filter. And this is so your coils do not interfere with your AM radio or the AM radio of those around you. So there are 2 of these, one for each bank of cylinders and coils, and they need to be screwed into a ground. So in that case, our ground, I believe, is right here. Last time I was in here, when I brought this thing back to life, I missed that. So, but now I know what it is, because I had to fix it on the truck. So I can fix it, but one on each side, don't miss them. Here's the other end. You see I put anti-seize on it. I'm gonna get my 32 millimeter wrench, get that tight, and then we'll just keep putting stuff back together. All right, it's all back together now. We have oil in it, we have coolant in it, batteries installed. I still, for the life of me, cannot find the other end of this vacuum line. I will investigate that more. I have to take this back off to do it, but we should be able to prime it. Now, one of 2 things are going to happen at this point. Firstly, make sure that your crank position sensor is off. We do not want the engine to fire. we just want it to spin. We want the starter to put in some work for us. So as you can see, there's my crank position sensor. It is currently unplugged. It gets plugged in right down here at the bottom. You may remember seeing that sensor when you were working with the front timing cover. That's the one that has the all-important tone ring you need to make sure you put back in right. Anyway, have that disconnected. Your crank sequence. Try to do 2 cranks of 30 seconds apiece. If you do 2 cranks of 30 seconds apiece with a few minutes between them, and you don't see your dummy gauge light up, right? You don't see the needle jump up to the middle. And I'll point out the gauge just to make sure we're all on the same page here. If you do not see this jump up to the middle, then that probably means that the pump does not have enough oil to prime. Don't panic. There is a procedure that you can do at home that will let you prime the pump via the oil pressure sensor port where that screws in. You're going to need a pump sprayer. You can get that at Harbor Freight. You're going to need to adapt the end of it. You can get that adapter with an oil pressure tester kit from Harbor Freight, where you get a mechanical oil pressure gauge. You'll need those 2 things. You're going to need a cheap oil filter. I'm going with a MicroGuard MGL 51372. And this does not have an anti-drain back valve. So what that lets us do is, if we need to, we can pump oil up through the filter up into the pump and prime the pump in that way. And it will work because that's what I had to do for my truck. So again, mechanical oil pressure gauge tester kit from Harbor Freight. A cheap, generally the cheapest filter you can find will not have the anti-drain back valve. Only really the premium filters have it. So think your Fram Tough Guard Ultra, Mobile One, whatever, Wix XP, those all have anti-drain back valves. You don't want those. You want something cheap like this. You're going to need that, and you'll need a pump sprayer or some way to push the oil in there. Something that can pressurize and push the oil in there that's not insanely high pressure, right? You need those things. If you have those things, we're good. As for me, I'm going to sit down, contemplate the universe for a second, then try to prime it, because I have a little bit of trauma from the... All right, check it out, guys. I have success. So we have oil. All right, let's get this plugged in. As you can see, it's our crank position sensor. Push her in, make sure she's in there tight. Oof, yeah, we want to do that. We do not want that coming up and hitting the belt. That would be bad. So we'll tuck that out of the way. In fact, we'll see. I mean, that's back up there, so I think we'll be all right. All right, I'm gonna crank it for realsies and see what we get. Well, I don't know the camera can show it, but the EGR is not fully tightened down. It's pushing exhaust with the engine running, so got to figure out how to make it tighter than what I was able to do. What I described earlier, I'm not sure how we're going to do it, but I'll figure something out. Good morning, everyone. Today is a new day. So, been doing some testing here, so it's actually kind of warm in here. As you can see, the engine's at temp, or it should be pretty close to temp. Initially, she wasn't running real good. I had forgotten to plug in the coil for cylinder number 3, which is passenger side. Plug that in, clean that right up. I had to tighten the EGR because it was chooching out exhaust. Fix that. After that, the only issue was that one vacuum line I keep talking about. So what I did is and you would have seen this when you were working on this, but there's some vacuum lines that go to a big reservoir under the vehicle, and I tapped one of those, turned it into a 3-way, and ran a line up to my line up front. So now my air conditioning works like it's supposed to. So that's fixed. So now the final test. The symptom, what we had going on was that we were running on low pressure or borderline pressure when we were idling hot in drive. So we're supposedly hot, we're idling, now we're in drive. And it appears we're having the same issue. I wonder if it's an electronics thing. Because I cleaned everything out, the timing is perfect, and it's a higher volume pump. It's moving more oil. It should be generating more pressure. So at this point, the only other thing that I could do would be I can hook up a mechanical gauge and see if there's some sort of weird electric thing going on and see what the actual pressure is. But the only other thing it could be at this point, because I checked the pickup and it was clear. Go ahead and turn the engine off. I checked the pickup and it was clear. And that I have that, that'll be at the beginning of the video. Got to edit that in. And we've got a brand new oil pump. The timing set's brand new and tight. So we know we don't have stretched out chain or tensioners or any leaks anywhere. The only other thing it could be, if it's not some sort of electronics issue to where that gauge is just being weird, is that the bearings on the crank are just getting worn out. That is the only other thing I can think of that would be doing this. Because your other main culprits where you lose oil pressure, where your pump's worn out or your pump is leaking, where your tensioners are worn out or leaking, or your pickup screen is clogged. I've checked all that and it's good. And I am not putting a new engine in this van. It took me 25 hours of work to get this far. 25 hours to rip it down, do the timing set, and put it all back together. So though I have the knowledge, and I probably have the tools, and I have the funds, I am not going to put a new engine in this. I don't have the space right now. My service bay is filled with RV. And I don't have the time. Alright, that's going to do it for this video where we did successfully swap out the oil pump and replace the timing set on my 1997 Ford E-150 Econoline van with the 5.4 liter engine named Enigma. I am disappointed that I wasn't able to resolve my problem, but hopefully the information in this video is going to help those who may have a legitimate timing set or oil pump problem. That said, if you like this video, if you found it interesting, if you found it entertaining, please consider like, sharing, and subscribing. That does help to grow the channel and allow me to bring more content like this. Please also leave a comment. I like to read them, I like to reply to them, and I do like to learn from them. And lastly, guys, I make mistakes like buying this stinking van so that you don't have to. I'll catch you guys next time. I think we're leaking slightly, so that's